because you know your truth and you know how to show up and you know your strength in the world. And even sometimes if you don't believe it, I always told her, I'm like, fake it till you make it. Know what that thing is that moves you, that rocks your world, and then believe in yourself. Even when it's hard to believe in yourself, then just fake it for a while, because eventually you'll figure it out. You'll know how to do it. And if you want something in your life, you're the only person who can create it. And know that whatever it is that you want, you can manifest.
From Evia Events, it's Hillary Saves the World, a podcast about how people are using their positions, passions, and pocketbooks to change their worlds, one mission at a time. I'm Hillary Laney, and today's mission comes to you from Bainbridge Island, Washington. You will hear from my guest, Zaakara Stratman, a senior program manager at Microsoft, where she has worked for over 20 years. She is a natural leader who inspires people with her compassionate approach to business. Zaakara, tell me about your childhood. Where did you grow up? What was your family life like? I don't know. What was it like being a young Zaakara?
Well, I came to this country, to Michigan exactly, when I was 2 months old. I was born in South Africa. My parents were both born and raised there. So, an interesting childhood. My parents were separated young and divorced, and so I was really raised by a single mother. And for a woman who had come to this country with nothing and a small child, didn't really know anyone, didn't know what to do, where to go, how to handle that. We had neighbors across the street that took us in and sort of acted as parents to my mother and grandparents to me, and really helped to boost her up and to help remove some of the layers of what she was raised with as an Indian woman in South Africa, you know, raised basically to be married off when she was 14, 15 years old. Wow. So for me, childhood was a lot of watching her challenges in trying to be a single parent, to be a woman in the workplace, to, you know, make a living, take care of us. And she had a choice to go back to South Africa when my dad and her split up, and she chose to stay in this country. And she wanted a better life for me that didn't look the same as what she was raised with. And so I was really lucky that way, and moved around quite a bit and lived in different places in Michigan, moved to Arizona when I was 12.
Was that a hard transition? 12 years old, that can be a tough year to...
It was a little bit. It was interesting because I didn't quite want to be where I was at, because I was living with my dad and my stepmother, and that was kind of, you know, a little tenuous. And so it was the end of 6th grade, and I don't remember feeling stressed about it. I remember thinking it was uncomfortable and I wasn't thrilled. But I kind of went into a different school. It was a good transition point, and that all worked out okay. You know, with the background that I had from elementary school and just having access to computers and different things like that, it was great. It kind of gave me an in middle school to help TA and do other things that most kids weren't doing. So I had different places where I could go, maybe hide or work with bigger kids or things like that made me feel a little bit more like I was at home. I found those commonalities that I was interested in both of those places. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, I mean, gosh, even at that age, the technology piece and being a TA. So, okay. So where did you go to school? You know, what was your education like? Has technology always been part of the focus, or did you focus on other things as well?
I think I lucked out. My parents put me in sort of a better area school district where my dad lived in Michigan. And so like 3rd grade, they had computers. They had one of those like rotary phones with a dial-up modem that you dial the number to the mainframe and then put the phone in the modem thing. And And then on the screen, you would type commands, and it was so exciting. And I remember, like, and it was in the middle of the library, and I always remember thinking that was super cool. And we had, like, Apple IICs and learned to do BASIC. It was just part of the curriculum, and I guess I was really lucky to have access to that. And so when I moved to Arizona and went to this... it was a private boarding school. I was a day student, but it was K through 12. And so they had computers and, had a bunch of classes, computer science classes and things like that, which I think was still unusual in the early 80s. And because I had so much experience, or at least had access to, then they were like, oh, computers, so you can help TA the high schoolers who had never written code. And I just, for clarity, I don't write code. I'm not a developer. I'm bad at it. But for some reason, that's how I kind of got sucked into it. And I think it was just a way, with all of my young kid insecurities, it was something that I felt confident in and I liked playing around with because it was just interesting and it was a different toy. Mm-hmm. So I just stuck with it because I was curious more than anything else.
So when you went, did you go to college after
I did.
You graduated? So what did you study? Where did you go to school?
That's another really long story. I'll try to keep it short.
No, it's good.
So I graduated at 16 from high school, and I got a full ride scholarship to Arizona State University.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think I burnt myself out a little bit in high school, and so I went to ASU for a year and a half, and in that third semester, my mom passed away unexpectedly. So I ended up quitting school. I thought I wanted to go into engineering. Then I thought I wanted to be a teacher. And none of those things were interesting. So and I was working full time, so I wasn't really into it that much anyway. And sadly, because of that situation, it sort of upended part of my life, and I stopped going to school for a while and just worked and took care of myself and tried to figure out what I wanted to do next in my life. But then, over time, I realized I probably needed to go back to school. And how I ended up doing that was just taking community college courses, like Spanish and different things that I was interested in. Then finally was able to figure out how to get myself back into school full time, and found out I was pregnant with my daughter. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so then I was like, oh,
surprise.
Right? Exactly. And, at the time it was really scary. I was single and on my own. And again, it was the early 90s and, still not necessarily a regular common thing. And so I realized in that moment that I really needed to finish getting my degree. And I had this really strong feeling it was a girl and wanted to be a really good example to her about how to have a career and take care of myself and do all of those things. And kind of flashing backwards really quickly, I remember a conversation with my mom when I was 15 saying, don't ever depend on anybody to take care of you. Always take care of yourself. And so I had this crazy thing in my head where I think I overdid it a little bit sometimes, but I moved to Florida. My grandparents lived there. I went to University of Central Florida, and by then they had started a management information systems degree.
Okay.
Again, I don't do development stuff, so doing a comp sci degree wasn't that interesting to me. It was just way too much computers and nothing else. And so that MIS degree was perfect because it was partly business and it was partly computers.
Okay.
And it worked out perfectly. So my grandparents took care of her, and I finished getting my degree. It took me about 10 years on and off to do it, but I think I found the niche and the thing that I was most interested in. And that's really what launched me into the next steps, which was basically I sat in the classroom one time, saw them share in a business class a video of Bill Gates working with the Excel team, and I was like, I want to work there. That's so cool. As luck would have it, Microsoft actually came to campus and they were looking for graduates. And so I went through, they invited me to go through the interview process, and in 2 weeks to the day after I graduated, I was on a plane to move to California to be a technology specialist at Microsoft in California. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And how long did you end up working at Microsoft for?
17 years as a full-time employee, and now I consult with them.
So I shared this story with you before. I'm going to share it again. I've known you for over 10 years now, and I still remember the first time I saw you at Tech Ed, one of Microsoft's big public conferences, and you were preparing or getting ready to go and speak at the Women in Technology session that was taking place it was like a lunch session or something like that. And I just, I was pretty young in my career at that time, only a few years in, and in that environment, there weren't a lot of women,
No.
I mean, there just weren't. And even still today, it's gotten better, but it's nowhere near what it should be. And I remember in that moment, I sort of, I framed you as like this, even though I didn't know you, I knew nothing about you, but there was this energy you gave off in the way you showed up, where I just framed you as like this incredible leader. You just sort of exuded leadership. So my question to you is, I mean, you have held leadership roles and in a company like Microsoft and amongst very just in a very elite group of people. I mean, I know the groups that you've worked in and just brilliant people. How did you get into that? Was it something that you strove to become and you were like, I want to lead people. This is something that excites me. Was it something you just kind of landed into? I don't know. Like, what's your experience with leadership?
I think it was interesting because I don't think I went necessarily seeking it, though you are told, and I think even now with raising kids and everything else, everybody's always talking about leadership. Everybody wants to be a leader. If everybody's a leader, there's no followers.
So true.
And so, there's a balance I think that we need to strike in this world. And I think in that environment, I had a lot of different managers. There's always a lot of changes happening in these environments, different reorgs, different business priorities. And as I moved through my career, I think it just naturally would happen in different pockets, working with groups around running events or building a virtual training program. I ended up in that place, but I also was really blessed because I had a couple of managers who were phenomenal leaders, and they led by example, and they led by facing their team and helping their team to rise up past them. I always have this image in my mind of like Forrest, he's a dear friend and has always just been such an example to me, where he was always had his back towards what was the uphill thing behind us of leadership. And he was always kind of putting his hands down and lifting everybody up, giving them a leg up every single time you turned around. And I think, for me, it's about authenticity and passion. And when you care about the thing that you're doing and the people that you're doing it with, and you show up authentically, it makes a difference. And you can be inspired yourself, but also share that energy and inspiration with other people. And so for me, when you talk about leadership, it's not a hierarchical thing. We all are sitting on the outside edge of that circle next to each other, and we all have our role to play, and we all come with our very special skills, and they complement each other. And how do we bring those pieces together to make a team that can be dynamic and moving and growing and adapting to the changes that are happening? And so I guess to answer your question, I never really thought of myself in that leadership role. I just always cared about what I was doing. I'm really passionate about learning and development. I'm really passionate about technology. And so about 5 years into my career, when I really figured out the keys for me and my happiness, as well as what I thought success looked like for me internally, not out to the world, and I followed that's when I think my career became more rich, and where I got to interact with amazing people like you and so many other people that we know still, that we're just, those connections continue even if we haven't worked together for years. And I think that was the component that made leadership important to me, and that's what I learned from the people I respect the most. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question very well.
Absolutely. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Sort of along the same tone, I guess. As you and I both know, there's challenges that we as women in this industry specifically face that are unique and, not something that everyone deals with. What kind of obstacles or challenges have you faced, as you've grown in this industry, and how have they, I guess, helped make you stronger or helped you advance or maybe even become more successful as a result?
Such a great question. Thank you. And thank you for your other observations of me from the past. It's amazing always to understand how people see you. And I think being in a male dominant industry is a challenge, generally speaking, that we talk about. We hear women talk about it regularly. And I don't want to repeat all of the things that people say. It's like sitting in a meeting and sharing an idea, and people sort of blow it off. And the next thing you know, a man says it, and then they bring that up again. And I think I came from a lot of male abuse growing up. And so I already came in with a lot of my own insecurities and challenges. And then going into that environment, I also found that I was really trying to find myself in there and trying to understand how to deal with those situations without taking it all on personally, which I think happens probably more than any of us really want to admit. Mm-hmm. And I did. I took it really personally, and I let it define who I was and remind me of how I was defined growing up. And what I started to find over time is when I found other strong people who respected me, male or female, I gravitated towards those people, and those are the people that I work with. And doing that work and really understanding the value I brought, I was able to see sort of the incongruence that had happened around me. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of didn't have anything to lose but to continue speaking up and sharing my voice and honoring the fact that I might not always be right, because nobody is, mm-hmm. but also saying, hey, I bring value to the table and I want to share these things. I don't know that I found the secret key in that environment, in that situation for myself. I think I was really lucky to work with great people, and so it made it easier, but I think there was also, and still is, a really large bias. And so the success for me dealing with those situations was really finding out who I was and speaking my own truth, mm-hmm. and honoring who I am. So probably my biggest takeaway from the years in that environment, deeply in it, was that I learned to start honoring and respecting myself and allowing myself to not take everything so personally, or not take everything in so deeply, because they were just people's opinions about things. And unfortunately, sometimes it does become personal, and people get personal in hard situations. And I found a way through help and talking and my own work to be able to step outside of that and be an observer in those situations and look at what may be driving the bigger conversation. And so for me, I think if you can be in those situations, step outside of them and go, okay, I'm going to act like I'm the director sitting out in the audience watching the show going on the stage. Okay, so here are these dynamics. I can't change anything if I'm an actor on that stage, but as the director, I can look at it differently, and I can frame it differently, and I can choose how I react to those things differently. And therein lies that strength and power, that inner sort of grounding that I think is really important, and we don't talk about as much in leadership situations or in corporate environments where we're still all human, and we bring our humanness to our jobs and to everything that we do. And for me, this is very much about that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I learned in the years in that environment was it sort of broke me down, and it gave me an opportunity to build myself up with my true self versus sort of all the layers that other people had put on me and their pieces, because I was able to step out of it a little bit more and see and hear and learn differently. Yeah. So
yeah, it makes sense. I love that director analogy. It's a good way, because it helps to remove some of that personal stuff too. Yeah. And see it from the outside. I think that's very smart. As leaders, we make mistakes.
Right? Yes, we do.
As much as it can be painful. Some are really big, some are small. When I say that, are there any that kind of surface to the top for you that were really impactful, that you learned something from, or maybe even helped get you where you are today? What is that like for you to make a mistake and then have to move on?
So I'm going to go back to my mom again, because she was such a huge influence in my world, even for the 17 years we were together. She always taught me to say I'm sorry. She always taught me to own my stuff, because she used to own it with me. As a parent, she made a mistake, she'd lose her temper, whatever it was. She would come back and apologize. And I've done that with my kids. And good, bad, or indifferent, I've done it at work. If I make a mistake, if I fly off the handle, or if I say something dumb, or I make a bad decision, and I reflect on it, and I'm very self-reflective to, like, almost a flaw, I think, in some ways. It doesn't always serve me, is, I go back and I own my stuff and I have those conversations. I know, when I was running this virtual training program, we had this big group of vendors. I worked with your team and a few other teams also. Man, there were times where things would get stressful, and, I was only sleeping maybe 10, 15 hours in a week, because we were going 24/5, 6, around the globe delivering this training. And I would just, I'm not good without sleep. And so I would just pop off, and I was like, oh my God. And, and I would just try and really be humble and go back and say, look, I messed up. And again, there's this balance of, like, being humble and having some humility in those situations where you really mess up. And sometimes I wasn't wrong. And sometimes I was like, hey, I still could have handled that better. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the decision I made was the wrong decision. I just could have done a better job how I communicated it or how I dealt with it. And I think that's the other side of it. Like, again, we're people. Mm-hmm. And just because I play a certain role in our group, it doesn't make me more or less important than somebody else's skills or value to the team. And so for me, having that open, honest discussion, I still work with and interact with people from that period of time, and we still have talks about that. Mm-hmm. Sitting on the other side where I sit now, it's like, oh, do you remember when? And the feedback always to me was, they're like, yeah, and you always owned it. And so it's nice for me even asking that question, and thank you, because I think it's something, even after all these years, people still reflect back to me and say, hey, you never, had that weird tension of you're this person and we're this person, and you never treated us differently. And I'm like, but why would I? And I think we have a lot of that in this world right now, and it would be really nice if we could find that common ground and just be self-reflective a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, and at the same time, I made some pretty big mistakes and had to, run with my tail between my legs and be like, okay. And that's not always well received when you say you're sorry. Sometimes with leadership, they're like, and that was another lesson too. And just going, okay, well, using data and information and showing up in a place of, all right, here's what I did, here's what happened, and here's how I solve it moving forward. And this is why it won't happen again. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that any of it just depends on the situation. I think I've had good outcomes and bad outcomes, and it has hurt my career at times too, Sure. The reactivity or the challenges or not communicating well has impacted my ability to be good at being an example of leadership to the people around me.
Mm-hmm. I wish I could have met your mom. I just love it. That's the way you describe that. It's a valuable thing to learn at such a young age too. And it's a good tip. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing that more with my kids, because I probably don't do enough of it.
Well, you know one of my children pretty well, and yeah. and she I think, I said I was sorry a lot to her because she's the oldest, and she was a lot like me. Yeah. And yeah, it's humbling, but as they get older, they appreciate it. They come
Sure.
back, they see it. It creates a different dynamic. I don't know what it is. My mom was really smart.
Yeah, I could see that. The space that you're in, technology, fast growing. I realize you're not currently fully, a full-time employee at Microsoft, but you do still work with Microsoft. You're in the space. You've also been involved with events, and you're working with events. I mean, these event technology is like one of the most demanding, stressful industries that are out there. How do you manage all of that? Staying current piece of being relevant and keeping up with how fast it's always moving, and how do you kind of manage yourself in that space that helps you stay, maybe not at all times, but at least able to show up and get the job done and manage the stress component of it.
Years of experience and getting my behind kicked a lot. I'm not doing it really poorly before I can figure out how to do it better. Those are the simple answers, I think.
That's good.
Yeah, I think, I'm lucky enough in the work that I do, and because Microsoft is just at the bleeding edge of so many things, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of time in my job of reviewing content, because I do a lot of learning and development work. And so I'm constantly looking at content for, from Microsoft out to customers in different groups. And so that's one way to stay sort of on top of it. And we consume conference information and get that out too. And we look at it through a lens of curriculum and training and things like that. So I'm lucky that my job just innately allows me to keep up on that. And some of it's just fun, me poking around and seeing what's new and different out there. For me, because training and education are so important, events are just that natural output of that environment. I think with regard to staying, how do you manage, because it gets super stressful and there's just this frenetic pace that can happen, especially if you get into event time. It's really just taking the time to make sure like the basics of my life are handled, like making sure I'm trying to get enough sleep, and then I'm eating well, and I'm taking care of myself, and I'm taking some space to just be quiet in my day. And again, it's that observation, like stepping back and going, okay, years of experience tells me that we're always going to get this stuff done. It might be really frenetic, and there might be 20 people coming at you at once asking all these questions. And then it's like, okay, what's the most pressing thing? And then my brain naturally works as like, it loves puzzles. And so how do we create some type of picture out of the puzzle pieces? And I think over years of doing that, it's become somewhat second nature, but it really is about sometimes just remembering to take a breath. I think some of what we were talking about as we were prepping for this was, those moments where we were on site at these events and people are just coming at you from every direction, and you're sitting, at a panel watching all this stuff moving for endless, 12, 14, 16, 18 hours and so on. It is important to take a few minutes. It isn't important to remember to take a few deep breaths, and just, even if you have to step away for 5 minutes and go get some fresh air. I think we forget to take care of ourselves. I think the engines that be would like us to just keep going and going and going, but we're not machines. We're not computers. We're going to run out of fuel at some point. And so for me, I think the biggest lessons I've gotten with events, especially, is like trusting that the people that you have can do their jobs. And yes, there's equipment failures. There's also usually a solution. And sometimes there won't be. And sometimes the people who are hiring you aren't going to be happy with that answer. There's so much we can do. And we do the very best that we can. And I think we also tend to forget that we're doing our very best job. And so I think perspective is really important. I lost a lot of perspective early on just running. And, those events are long, and you're long days and going from 5, 6 o'clock in the morning until midnight. So it is hard to get sleep. But leading up to it and going through it, I think communicating, remembering to take those little breaks, even when you can get them, remembering to feed yourself is really important. And just trying to take a step back or take a quick pause and go, okay, what all's coming at me? Because when we're in the craziness, you can't figure out a solution to fix it if you're wrapped up in it. Mm-hmm. So maybe back to the director, right? I mean, It really is. And I had a person that I worked with for years, and I can't take credit for that. It was all hers. But, it's served me really well of pulling myself out of those situations, because you just forget, because you want to do such a good job. Mm-hmm. We need to be a little bit easier on ourselves. But it's, I love the pace of environments. I was just at this little conference for 50 people. It was really sweet. It was a wonderful gathering. It was 50 to 100 people. But the woman who was in charge of it, she doesn't usually do events, and she doesn't know how to do AV. And bless her, she was so delighted that I was there to help. And I was like, it's pretty simple. And she was talking about how hard it was and how it wasn't going to be good. And she did a great job. She pulled the whole thing off. It was a bunch of healthcare professionals. It was awesome. It was simple, but it was still awesome. And so she taught me last week about it is our perspective. We get ourselves wrapped around something, but how people perceive it can be completely different. So,
yeah, it makes sense. Given the current landscape that's going on, and also, the technology piece and how it's a pretty male-dominated industry, do you feel as a woman that and maybe your answer is different today than it would have been, say, 10 years ago. I don't know. I'll let you kind of think about that. But, do you feel that there is an advantage or disadvantage of being a woman in this industry and in this space, or just even in, working professionally in general?
I think we have tremendous opportunities today that we didn't have before, because everything around us is being agitated. We've been spinning sort of slowly. This pace has been getting faster and faster and more frenetic. And we're at this inflection point that's, I think, going to continue. And I think the opportunity for women to step into their power and to step up into these spaces of the frenetic with the flow that we bring into the world. I had a teacher once who explained to me that women flow like the rivers, and we move quietly, but when we show up, we bring all the strength of that water. And it stuck with me from the perspective of, we have been in these industries, these male-dominant industries, even medicine. Still, I have a sister who's a trauma surgeon. I know a lot of women who work in industries where they're the minority. And we're in a climate where I'm going to say something very maybe edgy, but it's like there's sort of a war being waged on us yet again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the difference is there's more women in the workplace than there's ever been. And we are starting to own that, what we bring into the world. And so the opportunity we have is tremendous from the perspective of, we can start doing this. I mean, this is a perfect example of you doing this podcast and bringing women in to start talking, and other people are doing it, and we're putting this energy out into the world, and it's needed. And we're not just doing it for us, we're doing it for our daughters, and we're doing it for our sons, to find a different balance than what we've had for hundreds of years, thousands of years. There was a time, there's lots of anthropological information that has sort of been suppressed over the years, where there were these matriarchal societies. And I'm not saying that's where we need to go, but we need to find a way to bring the balance in. And so I think because there's so much disruption happening right now, it's a beautiful opportunity for us to sort of emulate that river and flow into those cracks and to in those places that are open, and start to bring everybody up with us, right? Water will help things to float where it wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. And I hope that that's what we're all going to keep doing and trying to do. I mean, again, you're one beautiful big voice and trying to move this forward too, and honoring that and bringing other voices forward. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thanks for being part of it. Kind of along the same topic, a little bit different. I think women face challenges. I mean, definitely parents as a whole. I think the work-life balance thing is real, whether you're male or female. But I think as a woman and a mother, it's a little bit different, right? I mean, there's just a different experience there and a different expectation. And, you know, here we are, we've fought all this time and put all this energy into getting us into the workplace, and we're there, but we're also at home. We're trying to find this balance between the two. How do you do it, Zaakera? I mean, seriously, truly, because, you know, you are a mom and you are an amazing professional, and I know you with your kids, and you show up well for them too, and it just takes a lot to do that. And I'm just curious, like, how do you do it?
Thank you for all your compliments. I'm just going to stay here all day long. I'm just going to move in.
I've got tons for you. So.
You're too sweet. So it's really funny. I was just listening to this Audible book this morning by David White called The Three Marriages, and I just literally like through the first chapter. And he talks about work-life balance not being a thing. And I was like, So it's really perfect that you asked me that question.
That's great.
And now I'm not going to remember half of what he said. Just now I'm like, oh, okay. But I think the thing that struck me when I was listening, the part that I was paying attention to was that it's more like this confluence and movement. And it kind of goes back to that river flowing again of all of these moving parts. I remember when we were doing the women in technology pieces, and we would have execs come in and, you know, respectful, really amazing women. And I was like, you're at a pay grade where you can pay a nanny to come in and take care of, like, and you have all of these people. And here I'm like, I'm like just living paycheck to paycheck,
and
I was
getting by.
Right, you know. And my husband and I decided that he was going to stay at home long before people had stay-at-home dads, and it was a thing. And everybody would act like he's doing what, you know. We were doing all these things where it was not in the mainstream kind of lingo of life yet. And I think I used to listen to them and I'm like, yeah, but what about the common person? How do you do that? And I the thing that I liked about what David White's saying, that there's no work-life balance, is because I never felt like that was something I could do or I could achieve. And what I had to do was make decisions that put my people as my priority. And so that did mean that sometimes I had to like kind of tap the brakes of my career more, and I had to be more present and available at home. And it was more of a meandering. It was sort of like sometimes I turned up the volume and I was really in my career and busting behind to do it. And then there were times where I just had to kind of ease up a little bit and stay at home a little bit. Or I was really lucky. About 5 years in, I took a job working on tech ed, and they were running a test pilot program basically for people to work from home full time. And I was like, I am all about that. And I know it doesn't work for everybody, but we set up an office in my house, and what it allowed me to do is have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. So it allowed me to work in all the hours that I had the time to work, but it also allowed me to be present for my kids and go to their stuff and, you know, help out and drive carpools and do all the things that are needed, because it's really hard to do both. And then as I moved into other jobs, I asked that I still kept some days that I could work from home. Now, I was lucky, and that's not possible for everybody. I had a lot of talks with my family about it, and I don't think I always did it well. And I think as your kids get older, it gets a little bit easier because they're a little bit more independent. But I was challenged a lot by it. And I think one of the things that I had to remember was to be easier on myself. I was really lucky. My husband was always really kind and supportive and said, hey, look, I know you feel guilty and you feel bad about this stuff, but don't. Like, they're good, you know. And I really made sure when we had family time, we had family time. I did really unconventional things to be with my family, though. Like, we moved into a 32-foot Airstream and lived in it for 2 years with 2 young kids, you know. And when I was there, like, you can't, in a big metal tube, you can't get connectivity. So when I was there, I was there. And, you know, in that small of a space, you have to be with your people. And I remember when we finally bought our first house, I was like, this is it was like an 1,800 square foot house. And I was like, this place is way too big. The kids are way too far away from me. But I did unconventional things because I was always trying to find ways to be connected and close to them. You know, even when my son left my sunroof open on my car on Sunday, you know, Monday I took him out for dinner and I was like, okay, let's sit down and have a meal together. Because if he's at home, he wants to sit and do homework and he wants to do other things. And so watching them and adapting to them has been a big piece of it. And honestly, I don't have a really good answer of how I've done it, but they seem to be okay. And I just kept trying and just kept watching and listening to them. And sometimes you see that they need you more, and then you just got to say no to other things. And sometimes they don't want to have anything to do with you, so then you can say yes to other things. You know, and it's just this constant adaptation of life and motion and movement. And I think that's maybe the thing that I've gotten good at doing, is just being able to be like, all right, I'm going to go with the flow. And then there are times where you just say, no, we have to have family day. Like, no, we're going to go do this. And so I know you don't want to go hang out at the farm this weekend, but you're going to, and we're going to enjoy ourselves.
Yeah, we're going to have fun.
Right. Even if it's just you doing other stuff and me watching you, that's what we're doing. And so finding all those moments and like having his friends over, or participating in being a class mom. Like in middle school, I did that as much as I could, and scheduling stuff. And so now he's in high school, like all of his friends know me. Mm-hmm. And so having those moments of trying to get to meet and know people also has helped. And, you know, other parents. Anyway, I could go on and on. I don't have a really good answer at the end of the day. I'm just, I'm trying the best I can to do what I think works. And they tell me too when I'm messing up. My kids are very outspoken like I am, so they have no problem telling me what I'm not doing right.
So we've talked a little bit about the crazy work life, the family life. What about Zaakera? What do you do to take care of yourself?
Gosh, had you asked me that 5 years ago, I would have stumbled and said, I don't know. I think I define a lot of who I am on being a parent. And as the kids have gotten older, it's been harder to kind of figure out what I want. I have a lot of things that I've been blessed to stumble upon, and some of them I've actively been seeking out. I have had a 20 plus year Kundalini yoga practice, which I've done on and off over the years, depending on what's going on. And so we have a really beautiful, burgeoning community in Seattle that's been growing over the last like 5 years or so. I was one of the first groups that went through a level 1 teacher training in the Seattle area. So feeling really blessed by those teachings, and again, finding lessons in these ancient teachings that come through and being able to apply them to modern day life, because they're just as relevant. I have had a couple of, a Native American teacher also who's taught us a lot of indigenous earth-based kind of practices. And so for me, that grounding and going through ritual and ceremony that I've been taught and gifted has been really good. I tend to, because of my extroverted personality and my need to be busy, I need things physically to help me sort of kind of turn down the volume. And so those have been really helpful things for me, I think, over the years. And they've also helped me to, I think when I was talking earlier, get more in touch with who I am and knowing who I am, and understanding that when work pressure got really hard, or mom life, family pressure got really hard, I sort of dig in and try to figure out like what inside of me either needs to be healed, or what inside of me am I not doing. And that's just sort of self-reflective piece. Sometimes it's not very kind, but a lot of times using these practices has helped me to be more mindful of how I look at myself even. And so using that, and then working with different teachers and taking that time, and then also surrounding myself with communities who honor those pieces. So those pieces of my life look so very different than my corporate job. Yeah. right? And then trying to figure out my family somewhere in between. They get both sides of it. They see my work stuff and they know my work people and they've been involved in that stuff. And then on the other side of it, looking at the stuff that has nothing to do with my career at all. And then, you know, my passion for education has always been this piece that allows me to go out and look into the world and what can I find? What other thing can I do? I mean, on the way here, I was like on Audible looking for other books and looking for other, you know, information. And I mean, recently I'd mentioned David White, but being more exposed to poetry and being more exposed to books that aren't necessarily fiction or other things, but that are, they're creative in different ways. I've started to write a lot more this last year, which has been a really beautiful outlet for me. I tend to express myself a little bit better in writing than I do verbally sometimes. And it's been a really beautiful process that I've needed just with all the things that have been happening in my world. So I think how I take care of me is making that time. And I never used to, and I think it bit me a lot of times. I fell on my face a lot and got pretty beat up, and it hurt the people I love the most, because I didn't know how to deal with all of the emotions and feelings that I had. And so doing that inner work has helped, you know, going to retreats or going to those things that I feel called to. So for instance, I fire 10 for sweat lodges, and that was something that came about going to this women's gathering every summer around solstice. And it was brilliant because I was exposed to all of these different women from all of these different walks of life who have all of these different practices. And so it was like this smorgasbord of, here, try this, look at this, try, you know, and it just happened that I volunteered to help with Sweat Lodge. And so I went in the very first time and thought it was the most amazing thing ever, and wanting to be respectful of the tradition and what it comes from also, right? Because there's a lot of this cultural appropriation happening, and that is never my intention. It's like, if those teachings are going to be passed down, I want to honor them in what they were gifted for. And so in following those threads in my life, I've found ways to heal myself and take care of myself. And now I can hear a little bit more clearly the things that I couldn't. It's all the layers of this world have sort of slowly started to slough off, and it helps me to really take that time to settle in. And that ceremony, that time, whether it just be mindfully building a fire or going down to the water and writing some notes and sending them off in the water, it can be the simplest, smallest thing. You could just be sitting on the patio watching the birds or watching the bees. The rhododendrons are in full bloom right now, and I have a bunch in my yard, and I just sit and watch the bumblebees. That's ceremony. That's just in breathing. Like, it doesn't have to be fancy. But I think in my never-ending quest to try and not be so wound tight and stressed, especially because I'm a woman in a male-dominated environment and career, and technology is constantly moving quickly, and that's stressful. And then trying to be a mom and a wife and, you know, a leader and a worker and a this and a that, and I'm just like, how much can one person hold? and the truth is, we can't. And that's that whole piece about sort of relaxing into it and letting it move us a little bit, and then honoring and watching. Because every time I found like I was trying to wrap my arms around something and control it, it just made it harder and harder and harder. And I think that's one of the other gifts that we bring to the world as women, whether it be in our careers and leadership roles or otherwise, as mothers and partners and whatever else. We have this really amazing and beautiful ability to show up and see what all those moving parts are. And we can move them in ways that are really gentle and kind if we just ease into ourselves. And that's been a tremendous learning. I think in the last 20 years of my career, if there's one thing I would want somebody to walk away from, is like, take the time to listen to that voice. Take the time to just sit, even if it's just to breathe deeply for 5 or 10 minutes. Because you'll be amazed at what shows up when you just stop for just a little bit.
I love that you just said that, because one of the things I did want to ask you about, You know, a lot of our listeners of this podcast are going to be young women who are interested in technology, STEM, you know, the list goes on. And I think if any of them were here, like let's say we were talking to a live audience, or maybe a couple of them were sitting in this room with us, and you could have this conversation with them honestly, how would you help to prepare them for what's about to come and their journey into this space? And you know, they're being brought up in a time where at the national level and across general media, there's a lot of negative dialogue out there and all those things. And I don't know, I'm just curious from your perspective and what you've been through, like what would your advice be? What would you say to them?
So I will say to them the same thing I've told my daughter many times over the years. You have to trust that voice inside of you, and you have to learn to listen to it, and you have to take the time to take care of yourself, because you know your truth and you know how to show up and you know your strength in the world. And even sometimes if you don't believe it, I always told her, I'm like, fake it till you make it. Know what that thing is that moves you, that rocks your world, and then believe in yourself. Even when it's hard to believe in yourself, then just fake it for a while, because eventually you'll figure it out. You'll know how to do it. And if you want something in your life, you're the only person who can create it. And know that whatever it is that you want, you can manifest. There's nothing that you can't overcome. There's no hurdle. There's no wall. There's no ceiling. You can do it, anything you choose and you put your mind to. And the world will tell you otherwise, because it is easier to make you small and to hold you down than to witness you in your glorious power. And so I watched that in her. I watched that in her from the time she was small. And I watched every time somebody told her she couldn't do something. Like the perfect example was she fell in love with this young man, and he lived far away, but she really wanted to make it work. And she's like, Mom, everybody's telling me long distance relationships don't work. And I said, well, do you want to make it work? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, then do it. Don't do what everybody else tells you to do. Forge your own trail. And I think that we in our society, when as women are hearing everybody coming at us, telling us that we can't, we take all that in deeply because we feel so deeply and we love so much and we care so much. But because we love and we care and we are those beings, we're the ones who have the ability to heal the world. We're the ones that have the ability to hold that container and help women and men heal. And we have to be reminded day in and day out of our power. And even when we don't feel like we have it, we have to tell ourselves we have it. Because if we do, we're just being told by the world that we don't. And she did. And she made it work and she figured it out. And he ended up moving here. You don't always have the answers when you're 16, 17, 18, 19. Heck, I don't have the answers, and I'm coming on fast towards my 50-year mark. I'm like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So it's okay. It's okay to not know. But that goes back to what I was talking about before, is that we have to take that time for ourselves to know ourselves. We need to take our time with other women to know each other, to lift each other up, to not do the patriarchal, we're going to beat each other up and try and climb all over each other. That's been set up to weaken us. When one young woman sees another young woman struggling in school, she is not your competition. She is your sister, and you need to put your hand out and help her up. And then you will teach her to put her hand out and help her, and she'll help you up someday. But if we don't start doing that, we're not going to be able to heal this. And I do believe that we can. And I think and with this conference I went to, they were talking about Hebb's law or Hebb's. It was this whole thing that fake it till you make it is actually proven by this whole system of, when neurons fire together enough times, you create new neural pathways. That's what the outcome of fake it till you make it is. Like, if you just keep believing, you rewire your brain. And when you rewire your brain, you have that capacity. So I say to all those girls, don't listen to the negative stuff. Believe in your own power and do the things that feed your soul. Do the things that you care about and you're passionate about. Because when you live from your heart, when you live from that place, everything else will connect. I had a teacher once that said the longest journey you'll ever take is from your head to your heart. But if you can live in your heart, you can change the world. And so for me, that's what my 20 years in corporate America has taught me. It brought me back to myself. It helped me remove all the layers of what society and family put on me, of the not good enough, of the you're too this, or you're not that, or I heard it all from my own family, not my mom, the men in my family. And so, find your tribe.
Get everyone all choked up. You listening to this in their cars and crying. I love you, Zaakara.
I love you
too. So, I know you well enough to know that you're really passionate about giving back and being involved in your community and, philanthropic efforts, especially through education and everything else. What's your investment in that? Are there charities or causes that you're working with, or things that that really tug at your heartstrings that you've been supporting?
There have been in the past, and I sort of, I had to take a step back a little bit this last year, but, my daughter is very much into the arts and theater, and so I've contributed money to the Seattle Theater Group and other charities locally that help to provide access to young children who are interested in the arts. I think it's really important, and an arts education has been something that has really helped both of my kids blossom in different ways. And providing access to all kids to that is, I think, a really big deal. My husband's an organic farmer, so I'm very really wedded to the land and taking care of it in a good way, in not adding chemicals to the soil and things like that. And so our local tilth organization out in Seattle area, Snoqualmie Valley Tilth, and other local groups that are helping to spread that support for new people who are interested in farming, but you can't afford farmland in a lot of places out here because it's very expensive. Providing tools and support and assistance and guidance to people who are interested in coming into that, because the landscape of our farm culture is changing also, right? And I'm talking about smaller farms versus agribusiness, which is a whole other beast we don't have time to get into today.
It's a whole nother series.
And I have a new passion, and so forgive me for bringing it up, but I think I don't have a charity that I'm supporting quite yet, and I'm still trying to figure out how we want to move down this path. But my 22-year-old daughter did die last March, and I realized how much, through the loss of my mother and my daughter and my grandparents, some of the closest people to me, we don't talk about death in our culture, and we don't talk about the inevitable that's going to happen to all of us. And it's a tremendously huge rite of passage for us, birth and death, and then all those places in between. And so I've started to work with some friends around how can we bring resources to bear to people who are walking through that part of their life, because usually we don't look at it or pay attention to it until somebody we love is either dying or has died unexpectedly. And I fortunately or unfortunately have had a tremendous amount of experience in that realm of my life. And so trying to figure out ways, reading a lot, talking to a lot of people who work in that industry and in that place around how do we start bringing all of those resources and tools to bear for people, generally speaking. And so it's just another place that I'm looking to put my passion. And eventually when I figure out how and where I'm going to put money towards it, I will definitely let you know to spread the word. Please. But I think for me, it's really important culturally for us to be having the discussions that we've had today. But this is one of those discussions that I see bring people to their knees or just flat out onto the ground. And to be able to weave in some of what I've even talked about today in ceremony and ritual, but also to have people not be taken advantage of in their hardest times. And that happens a lot more than we realize in this society, you know, when we've corporatized people's death. And there are people who can't afford it. And they can't afford all those things, but they want to do those things for their loved ones. And so for me, that's sort of my big focus area right now, on top of just my work and life and momming and all these other things.
Else, add it to the list, right? Zaakera.
Has been, you know, really working to educate myself in that area and starting to bring that forward. So thank you for letting me bring that forward in the conversation.
So one of my questions is, what's next for you? What's your next big thing? Like, do you think this is maybe it? Like, is this something that you're looking to pursue?
I think it is. And I think I'm going to say this out loud, and I hope I'm not going to regret it. So in one of my recent level 2 teacher trainings that I was in around lifestyles and life cycles, we went through this meditation. And one of the things that our teacher asked us to do is, like, your guides and your spirits or whatever you believe in, like those other things that help you, ask them for what you want. And I was like, you need to tell me exactly what it is I need to be doing next, because I have no idea. And I'm really skeptical, right? I need to be told like 3 times. I have all these methods in my head over the years, though I've been doing these practices for years. My brain just doesn't always trust it. And so I remember writing down in big capital letters, tell me so I can't deny it. So we're sharing out later on, we're talking, and I'm sharing something, and my teacher, who usually doesn't stop people, stops me and says, you're going to write a book about your experience. And I was like, okay. Wow. So I think what's next is sitting down. I've been writing. I'm going to continue to write, and then I'm going to honor and see what comes of that. And it will be a lot about, I think, this journey of this last year of my connection with my daughter. Because she was my greatest teacher and is my greatest teacher. She continues to teach me all the time. And I put my life together and got back up on my horse, so to speak, after my mom died, because I had her. And I got my job at Microsoft, and I built an amazing career. And I'm sitting here with you guys because of her, in huge part. And I think in her death, I've learned more than I could have ever imagined, and I've just scratched the surface of it. So we'll see how it comes together.
I'm thrilled.
Yeah. And then the other part of that is really looking at maybe creating some type of structure or business where we consult with people and help them around, here's sort of, sitting with them, understanding what they might be needing in these really hard times that nobody wants to talk about in their life. And helping them through it, and normalizing death and loss and grief. Normalizing grief is so important, because it doesn't go away in a day, and it doesn't go away in a year. And, to all the parents out there who have lost children, and all the people out there who have lost somebody, like, it's a lifelong thing. And I think it's really important. And so I think my passions and even my background in technology will help, right? All of those things come to bear. And so we'll see. I'm putting it out. Now I'm sharing it in something that's going to be recorded. So we'll see. But
I will be your biggest cheerleader. So
thank you.
I fully support this effort. I think you absolutely should do it.
You're so kind.
All right. So to wrap this up, I have kind of a big question for you.
Gosh, because the other ones weren't big enough as they were. I'm like, wow.
So if Zaakera Stratman saved the world, what would it be like?
Oh, I love you, Hillary. You're one of the wisest souls I know. Gosh, I don't know. I feel like that's a culmination of everything we've talked about. Empowering our youth, so that women know their power, and empowering men to know that they're equally as important, but it's not a power over thing. It's a power with, hand in hand. We need both to walk in this world. And I think to normalize and talk about the things that people tuck away behind their closed doors and that we hide away because it makes other people uncomfortable. If I could truly just show up as I am every day in my heart and soul, and you could do that, and everybody else that walks around could do that, I think the world would be a much happier and kinder place. And so if I had to do one thing to change the world, it would be to bring those teachings forward, to hug everyone and look them in the eyes and say, you're beautiful and amazing and perfect the way you are. And yes, we all have flaws, and yes, that's hard, but just keep working. You know, a lot of our wounds were not the wounds that we came in with, and we did come in with those too, but they were other people's wounds foisted upon us. We don't have to walk with them. We can put all that stuff down. So maybe writing.
It's beautiful.
Maybe all of this is how I'm going to change the world.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you, Zaakera.
Thank you.
I love you too, and this was amazing. I really appreciate you being part of this.
I'm so honored. Thank you for asking me. This has been phenomenal.